So there's two things that we learn here. Number one, he's involved in sketchy behavior from the very beginning. Two, he's not prosecuted. He's basically fired, let go, and everybody keeps it hush hush. He is a, quote, high-level bounty hunter who helps clients recover assets. This is the first entree into what will eventually sprawl as a global intelligence network.
So recently, Saagar Enjeti was on the Flagrant podcast talking about the truth regarding Jeffrey Epstein, who he is, what his background was, and why there are so many lingering questions from that time that are still relevant today in light of recent events like the Epstein story cover-up we're witnessing. Saagar Enjeti is an absolute expert on this case. He's dove way into it. He has all the nitty-gritty details of it, and I can't wait to see what he has to say here, and let's see what he has to say. So like this video and subscribe to the channel.
Just break it down. Who is this Epstein character that we all think we know so well?
I'll start off from the top. I totally understand people who are saying it's a conspiracy theory, and in large part, I think it's because it's been wildly overstated by some people, which is natural in open environment, right? They're like, he's obviously Mossad, he's obviously CIA, this is part of a blackmail ring. And in my opinion, the American people actually have it right. They just don't have the language, the facts, and they need to pull it together. And I want them to have the information that they have to be able to make that case, especially whenever we have the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett just yesterday, who said unequivocally Epstein did not work for Mossad. Now, remember,
and by the way, that's what Ben Shapiro is citing as reason that we can just, dispose of that whole idea outright. That one of the Israeli prime ministers, former ones, that was only in for like 6 minutes. It was actually about a year. We don't have to see anything here. There's nothing to see there. It's case closed.
No, there are key terms here that matter. Work is not the same as asset or worked with or worked with at some time. And this is the master game that these people play, the non-denial denial. It's one of the most classic things in the history of Washington. So let's start at the very, very, very beginning. And I've put together some stuff. That's why I have my laptop here with me. So the first time that we can see any link between Jeffrey Epstein and somebody who would become eventually very important to a story in the intelligence world is in 1974. So 1974, right here in New York City, where we are today, Jeffrey Epstein, despite having no college degree and being a dropout from New York University, is hired by Donald Barr. Now, why does that last name sound familiar? Donald Barr is the father of William Barr, who is the U.S. Attorney General under Donald Trump in 2019, who actually presides over the investigation into the Jeffrey Epstein suicide. I'll just call it a death here for now. So Donald Barr in 1974 hires Jeffrey Epstein at the Dalton School.
Does Donald Barr have intelligence connections himself?
Yes, he certainly does. As a
Yeah. See, this is one of the most ludicrous things that never comes up in common discourse, so I'm glad Saagar's covering this. It is true that Donald Barr made other controversial hirings at this time, but, Epstein's is especially so because this was a prestigious school, and it was a private school, but he had no real credentials to teach there. No licensure, no experience in the field, etc. And quickly, as we know, and maybe Saagar will describe this, he starts getting involved with younger women at the school, illicitly, and he was dismissed in what are still ambiguous circumstances.
Would be a surprise to all of you, as do all of the storied families of the people who are connected to the most elite private schools here in New York City. So here we have a New York Times report from 2019. Jeffrey Epstein taught at Dalton. His behavior was noticed. And what they talk about specifically is that Epstein, even here in his early 20s, is already exhibiting the pedophile behavior that it becomes known for. He starts harassing a lot of young girls, and in the span of just 1 year, finds himself basically under investigation and departs under weird circumstances after teaching math here at the Dalton School. So the question is, why did Donald Barr hire Jeffrey Epstein, a person at the Dalton School, to teach math, but despite having no credentials, no college degree? I mean, you can't even get a job at a public school without a college degree and a teacher certification.
Let me ask you
this is the first time we see it.
Okay, so let me ask this question. This is, and I think it's important to just give pushback so we kind of understand. I don't even want to call it pushback. My dad had a college degree. He walks in and he asks if he can be work in the news station.
Sure. And
so this is back in like the 70s. And he's able to get a job working in the news station. Eventually was on air. So there was a different time. Could teachers just teach at an elite private school?
No, they could not. Okay. That's the thing. So no, they could not. Not common. The Donald Barr, and by the way, actually departed the school at the very same time as Jeffrey Epstein. The cope from Donald Barr and others, the explanation is that he very often had an unconventional hiring strategy. But, people who attended credited Dalton and others, basically said it was a very weird hire at the time, and nobody still to this day really has an explanation for why. That's the very first known link, and it's weird. Okay, let's just be honest, it's weird. So from 1974 to 1975, we have the departure. So somewhere around 1976, Jeffrey Epstein meets a guy named Ace Greenberg of Bear Stearns. And of course, you guys know, for the younger audience out there, Bear Stearns is one of the most storied investment banks in Wall Street history. Went down in 2008. So Ace Greenberg, whose child goes to Bear Stearns, meets Jeffrey Epstein. Ostensibly, it's some sort of like parent event. So here we have Jeffrey Epstein's deep ties to top Wall Street figures.
So
it talks here about Greenberg.
Just so I can understand.
Yeah.
So Jeffrey Epstein was teaching
at Dalton.
Ace Greenberg's kid at Dalton.
Correct.
Builds a relationship with this Ace Greenberg guy, who is one of the heads of the bank.
Yes, he's the head of the bank.
And there's no real plausible explanation as to how he builds a relationship with him. I'll have to look into that. Whitney Webb wrote a great book on this called One Nation Under Blackmail that covers a lot of this in volume 2. Her book is excellent, by the way. I really recommend that. I didn't know it was related to like a parent-teacher event or something. That's strikingly weird, but it's still weird for him to have struck up this relationship because, as we'll see, he eventually becomes the assistant to a trader in the options trading area of Bear Stearns. And, you know, some people say he wasn't good at that, but somehow he got fast-tracked then to become a partner, like almost right away, like a year after. And that's weird too.
The most powerful man on all of Wall Street in the 1970s and 1980s.
Got it.
So Ace Greenberg hires Jeffrey Epstein initially on the options desk. What ends up happening is Epstein's actually not very good at that. So they're like, what's this guy any good at? So they transfer him to basically the high net worth money management desk. And effectively, for the next 5 years, Jeffrey Epstein learns the art and really the art of money laundering. He manages high net worth individuals' money. What he does with that money is he specializes in offshore accounting. And then specifically, what he does is he gets deep in with all of these shadowy figures who are experts in the Cayman Islands and moving money offshores. Now, this is the first known time that he begins to develop the portfolio that will make him very useful for intelligence agencies in the future.
Yeah, this is a conventional view among dissidents that talk about Epstein, that this is the stage where he develops expertise in moving money across seas, you know, to avoid taxes and things like that to help his clients. And that seems to have made him, you know, a potential intelligence asset from this standpoint. But still, it doesn't really explain how he got into both of the subsequent jobs that he had without any experience. So a lot of people also think that, you know, he had intelligence ties almost from the start. Maybe before he even got into Bear Stearns, you know, his relationship with, you know, one of the richest moguls on Wall Street is very hard to explain, given his personal situation.
All right, real quick. Are they moving money offshore to avoid taxes, or
initially it's to avoid taxes? Now, but what we eventually learn is from the formation of something called IAG. So after 5 years at Bear Stearns, Jeffrey Epstein is fired for a Regulatory D violation. Basically, he broke internal banking rules and insider trading. So there's two things that we learn here. Number one, he's involved in sketchy behavior from the very beginning. Two, he's not prosecuted. He's basically fired, let go, and everybody keeps it hush-hush.
Yeah, this is not like a criminal investigation or anything. It's something that he just got dismissed from that job from, and he was never prosecuted for it.
I'll come back to that in the future because he develops a strategy there called playing the box. Playing the box is a strategy he admitted to, where he said you can break the law and you can always get away with it because people will be too embarrassed to be able to call you out for it, which will.
And think about how prophetic that is, if that was the basis for which he would later use to develop his blackmail strategy of prominent politicians, you know, inviting them out to Little St. James with underage minors. He was trafficking to these people of prominence, recording them. And, you know, it's pretty clear that there was information that was left there. The FBI raided a safe on his property with digital media with printed labels of the people's names on it. This is not a conspiracy. This was once well documented. And then extracted wealth payments from those people. And that's the ultimate leverage you would have over someone, especially if you were tied into an intelligence service. What greater power over people of prominence is there than that kind of operation? Well, it seems like he may have developed that at IAG when he was, you know, getting into this field. And this strategy
will enable you to continue your money laundering.
Why would they be embarrassed?
Because Bear Stearns would be embarrassed by the fact that they have somebody who's managing so much money inside of their bank.
Was he internally caught?
He was internally caught.
It. So
and that's why he was...
So SEC doesn't find out. The Bear Stearns finds out.
Bear Stearns compliance, and they're like, look, we need to make this go away. We don't want to deal with this anymore. He just needs to go. So from that point forward, 1981, Epstein forms a company called IAG, the Intercontinental Assets Group. I'm going to read directly here from the description. He is a, quote, high-level bounty hunter who helps clients recover assets. This is the first entree into what will eventually sprawl as a global intelligence network, because a high-level bounty hunter who helps you recover money is not involved in, quote, legitimate business.
What does that mean, recover money?
Yeah, exactly. So it's in many cases, he eventually gets involved with people who are running Ponzi schemes and basically keeping and hiding money offshore. He sells himself, and it's very unclear because none of the records of this have ever really been released. But the description of high-level bounty hunter indicates to us that his specialization in offshore banking is one that becomes very important to intelligence networks. So this is where people might ask, like, hey, why do we even care about this? Why would an intelligence network even want offshore banking? And the reason why is in the 1980s, there were all of these very sketchy arms deals that were happening. Here we have in the United States, the Iran-Contra affair. This is the Cold War. And everybody actually has a very distorted attitude as to how the CIA front companies work. Nobody at the CIA has a bank at JP Morgan Chase that says CIA that goes and buys a front company building. Did you guys...
Yeah, and this has actually been true since the beginning of American history, because basically the first front operation in U.S. history was for the French to set up a front company in France led by the merchant named Beaumarchais to funnel money and arms to the American colonists as they were fighting the British before there was any kind of tangible U.S.-Franco alliance that would only come in 1778. So this is a long and storied tradition in U.S. history. And yeah, Epstein developed ties, it seemed like, to the underworld and those conducting these Ponzi operations as part of IAG. And that's just yet another reason why a lot of people think that, you know, he was an attractive asset to intelligence services. It's one of the most, best circumstantial pieces of evidence that fit into what many people believe were connections to Mossad or CIA or another organization.
Perfect example. Did everyone watch Argo? Did you guys watch the movie?
Yeah.
So remember how Ben Affleck's character flies to Hollywood and gets a front man to open a company and the money is laundered through the front man? That man would be known as a CIA asset because he's able to open that front company. So that's why it's very important to the CIA.
They don't work for the CIA.
Of course.
They have their own job.
Exactly. They have their own money. In many cases, they put up their own money.
Exactly.
But eventually get reimbursed somewhere in shady offshore banking thing on the back end. So these are vital parts of any intelligence network. Israeli, U.S., Saudi, everybody.
Because if the CIA's name
everybody
was on
does.
it, then
of course.
it wouldn't work as espionage.
Exactly.
Because Iran would be like,
you
why
have
is
to
the
be
CIA
able to
trying
hide
make
it.
a movie here?
And then you get Iran-Contra blown up.
That's exactly it. This is literally...
Right. I mean, I think that there is a lot of tie-ins between Iran-Contra and this ordeal and what the governments and intelligence services at the time were potentially looking for. Epstein not only had the proclivities of someone into shady business like this, like recovering assets from overseas, but also moving money. There were several different facets of his personality and background that would have made him an attractive asset to the intelligence services.
The story isn't necessarily in and of itself bad.
No,
it's necessary.
It's just the way that you do business. There's no value judgment here. So the point is that at this time, this is when he begins to develop a relationship in somewhere around between 1976 and 1981 with a man named Douglas Leese. Now, Leese is a very important character. Douglas Leese was a UK national. He's a verified in UK government documents as having been involved in multiple arms deals and is thought to have been at least somewhat of a CIA, MI6, some sort of intelligence asset. Douglas Leese is an expert, again, in offshore banking and international money laundering. At the age of 20, I think it's 28, and somebody can check my work on this, is that at the age of 28, Douglas Leese brings a young Jeffrey Epstein on a private plane to the Pentagon for purposes that we still do not know. This is long before Epstein is a billionaire. This is when he's involved specifically in offshore banking. Leese is basically the conduit through which he is then introduced introduced to all of these very important people. Yes, Adnan Khashoggi, who is a very important person in this story. Stephen Hoffenberg, who is basically the source of a lot of this information. Keep in mind, Stephen Hoffenberg, and he went on the record to Vicky Ward, who's the journalist who did the original expose on Epstein in 2002. He was convicted of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. What ended up happening is he was trying to con Epstein, but Epstein actually conned him out of $100 million. But he, Stephen Hoffenberg, basically showed the relationship between Douglas Leese and Epstein, which Epstein got very testy about whenever he was asked, basically pretended, I hardly know the guy. Leese is the...
Yeah, actually, Hoffenberg is the one that we point to when we think that Douglas Leese was an arms trafficker, because Hoffenberg explained that. And yeah, the relation to Adnan Khashoggi is also interesting too. He was a world-class playboy from Saudi Arabia, and when Epstein was arrested the second time in 2018, he was found to have a Saudi passport. So he had some kind of connections with either the Saudi government or someone in that intelligence apparatus, maybe Khashoggi. And Khashoggi, he was the client of Khashoggi in many respects too. You know, Khashoggi's name is almost never even brought up in this whole thing, but Saagar knows all the background. This is excellent.
Person who introduces Epstein to Hoffenberg, to Robert Maxwell, and to this Adnan Khashoggi. Now, the reason why all three of those names matter is that Hoffenberg shows the conduit of the way that Epstein was already working with illegal enterprises and offshore banking. The way that he alleges Epstein stole his money was specifically through one of these offshore transactions. The other two names
So a guy was running a Ponzi scheme.
And then he
got caught.
Yeah.
And then wrote a hater article about it.
And actually Epstein cooperated with U.S. authorities against Hoffenberg and basically got him locked up in prison.
Oh.
Yeah, this was actually the biggest British arms trafficking deal that had ever happened when it occurred. And so that's what's interesting about this too. This is not small potatoes arms dealing. This is some of the most powerful people in the world at the time involved in these arms deals. And he's right, actually. Actually, Epstein cooperated with authorities at this time to give information, and it seems like Epstein became some form of informant. And by the way, it's not the first time that Epstein became some sort of informant, because in the plea bargain that he had for his 2006 arrest and I think 2007 conviction, when he had that plea deal, that sweetheart plea deal, as part of that, and you can see the documentation for this online, the actual affidavit or document or whatever the technical term for it says that as part of this deal, Epstein will divulge information to the FBI and federal authorities regarding his activities and things he knows related to those activities.
This was only acknowledged years and years later. I mean, he was a master networker. We have to give it to him. But again, here's another link between the community, Intel, the U.S. government. Jeffrey Epstein, here's a link to offshore banking, and then specifically Adnan Khashoggi and Robert Maxwell. So who are these two individuals? Here he has Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi is the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was butchered in the Turkish embassy. But for our purposes, what can we look at here? Saudi arms merchant, world-class playboy dies. This is from his obituary in the Washington Post. So why do we care about Adnan Khashoggi and his association with Epstein? And these are verified ties between the two. Adnan Khashoggi is somebody who worked on all kinds of sketchy arms deals throughout his life. These people are very useful to the Saudi kingdom, to the Israelis, because they are cutouts. They're not officially part of the royal family. Their money is used to finance various different arms deals. He has a verified connection to Mossad and to funneling arms between Israel and Iran in the past. All of this is out in the public record. It's effectively been acknowledged, and I don't even think it's really disputable.
I know.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, despite all this so far that we've already talked about, we haven't even touched his connections to, Ehud Barak and Robert Maxwell and Les Wexner. For even saying this, you're a conspiracy theorist, right? Because Epstein, even at these young ages, is surrounding himself with arms traffickers, people with intelligence connections, and people who went down over major arms trafficking connections too. By the way, Hoffenberg hired Epstein in the 80s, I think the late 80s, and he actually gave him $2 million that he'd never pay back. He hired him as part of the Towers Financial Corporation. And, that's where he got some of his first big money as well. I shouldn't say first. He got a lot from Bear Stearns and then IAG, but this is yet another connection that he's had where he's made some money, and a lot of it's inexplicable. This $2 million for nothing. They call it it was reported as a loan, but that he never paid back.
You've spoken about this already, but I just want to make this, I want to make this incredibly clear, right? Where it's like governments and countries cannot be actively involved in these Cold War tactics.
Exactly.
So they need to find these proxies to do it.
Yes.
And those proxies might not necessarily be bad. Matter of fact, they offer incredible utility.
Absolutely.
So like a Khashoggi, for example, for Saudi Arabia might be one of the most important figures
Absolutely.
in executing the plans of Saudi Arabia without getting the people in charge of Saudi Arabia dirty. And at this point in time, it's looking like, as we go through the story, Epstein might be an asset to the United States of America, or maybe when we get into Maxwell, or at least it doesn't look like there's anything incriminating on him so far.
No. Well, I mean, to be fair, his pedophilia and his proclivities were kind of secondary to his money. Now, the reason why I think he eventually gets away with the stuff that he does in the future is because of all the work he did in the 1980s and the 1990s.
So there's
Yeah, Hoffenberg actually involved Epstein in what was a Ponzi scheme as part of the Tower Financial Corporation. Essentially, they were paying off older investors with the money of newer investors. And, he claimed that Epstein was an integral part of this Ponzi scheme. So actually, I'm not sure it's accurate to say that he wasn't involved in any criminal activity at this point. And also, Hoffenberg is known to have said about Epstein that, he's a genius. He's great at selling securities, but he also has no moral compass. And, there's just so many things about this background that really kind of influences the course of his life and the direction that it took. And it's really not surprising why people look back at this and think that, he was tied up in intelligence from, very early time, potentially.
For these various governments.
I don't want to connect this to like a movie, but there's this movie, Art of War, that Nicolas Cage is in.
Yeah.
And there's this.
I love that movie.
It's a great movie. And it's based on, I think, like a relatively.
It's based on, I think that guy we just released from Victor Bout or something like that. Yeah, that's right.
Lord of War, I think it's called.
We got a 6 woman.
Yeah.
For the Lord of War. Yeah.
Right.
And so basically, he goes. There's this moment where he's arrested, and this like guy from the FBI has been holding it down. And he eventually goes, "Hey, listen, somebody's going to come in that door and let you know that it's time for me to go." And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, blah blah." And to me, that's kind of what it's feeling like so far, where there could be these connections. And we might get it misconstrued where it's like the government is involved in this like illicit child fucking blackmail scheme, when in reality the government's looking like, no, actually, we're just running guns. And we're just
running
following
guns.
dirty money, and
we're funneling stuff between Israel and Iran. This is why, the Saudi government can't facilitate an Israel-Iran arms deal, right? These are all allegedly mortal enemies. But Khashoggi, he can do it. He can finance that deal, and we can make him whole on the back end. Now, similarly, go ahead.
And last thing I would say is, I was talking to a friend of mine. I think Morgan Stanley or J.P. Morgan banked him. I forget which one. Was it J.P. Morgan?
At that time?
This is later on.
Deutsche Bank and J.P. Morgan both banked Jeffrey Epstein.
And like.
Yeah, and actually, J.P. Morgan paid out a $290 million settlement to victims of Epstein. And the reasons for this is in the documentation, was for Epstein's financial direction under their institution of a sex trafficking ring. The one that the feds are saying doesn't exist now. There's nothing on that. There's no evidence of blackmail, any other clients, etc. But there was that lawsuit that paid out to the victims. This is on the record. So, yeah.
A friend of mine was working over there, and he basically, I was asking about it. He's like, he just operated with dirty money. Yeah. And I think that's why, the government had an eyeball on him, because it was advantageous for them to know who's sending him $30 million from El Salvador. He was the banker, and a lot of these banks will just take dirty money.
Of course they will.
If you're getting tens of millions of dollars from a third world country, please believe it's not because they're selling slushies on the street. There's some fucked up shit going on.
Yes.
So, and I'm just trying to position at this point right now, the government might think that they have an asset working in their best interest. At this point.
This is a rational case for them. We're not yet involved with eventually becomes the pedophilia ring.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good deep dive into his background, the kind of which I haven't really seen outside of Whitney Webb's coverage of this. Ian Carroll's done some coverage of this. Some others have talked about this in depth, but Saagar, man, he has a real command of Epstein's background. And I went down the rabbit hole on it a few years ago, too, and I've been following it. Actually, at first, when he got arrested in 2018, and that wasn't his first arrest, obviously, I didn't really think that there was much to it other than, hey, this is a rich guy with warped proclivities and a devious past. But then I realized in searching, he was so connected to not only the most prominent people in the world at that time, but also shady figures from the underworld of arms trafficking and potential intelligence connections and, rich Wall Street investment firms in his past. And, how he acquired so much of his wealth is totally inexplicable. I talked a little bit about the wealth he received from Hoffenberg. There's also a lot that came a little bit later when Les Wexner. He manages the money for Les Wexner. Wexner suddenly gives him a $77 million property. It was valued by the government, the most valuable and biggest property in Manhattan, private property. He also gave him several additional $1 million after that. Leon Black gave him about $150 million just to do his taxes, and apparently he was the greatest tax genius that ever walked the earth, and even then it wouldn't justify it. And, obviously he had connections with Robert Maxwell. He knew 4 Israeli prime ministers. He introduced Netanyahu to the executives at JP Morgan, which took care of a lot of his banking. And, Ehud Barak visited him 30 times in the years after he was convicted for child abuse in 2006 or 2007. And Ehud Barak lived there at prolonged periods from 2013 to 2017. 30 times. And we're just supposed to believe like there's nothing to any of these connections or any of potential involvement in intelligence services, even though that Barak was the chief of Mossad. He was also the former prime minister. It requires the suspension of basic reason to just say that there's nothing here and we all believe it and we don't even need to see any documentation, despite all the clamor that was done by the populist right, and I think rightly so, to say, hey, the Biden administration's covering this up. And I think so too. I think both sides are covering up. It's the uniparty. And I think it's because there's people on all ends of the political spectrum and in between that are involved to some extent with the blackmail operation that Epstein was conducting, possibly on behalf of Mossad or Israel. And to get that out, what's contained in those files may be enough to start a revolution. That's why they can't get those files out. And Trump's suffering for it. We'll see if he goes down with this ship because, man, this is ripping up his coalition like nothing else has this term. Bombing Iran didn't do this. His rift with Elon Musk didn't do this. So yeah, even rearming Ukraine, that's getting a lot of buzz too, but that's kind of being hidden in the background of the Epstein cover up. That isn't even giving him as much criticism as this issue is. I think it's ripping him apart. It's going to hurt him in the midterms, and you might say, hey, he doesn't have another election to run for. He's president now, second term, he can't run again. Well, to get the rest of his agenda through, you're going to have to maintain some political capital with your base and with Congress, some of which is in the process of signing on to Massey's legislation to prohibit them from concealing the Epstein files and what is related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. So we'll have to see where this goes. Bravo, Saagar. Great breakdown here. Saagar's great. Please subscribe to Breaking Point's channel that he runs. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Flagrant as well, and please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you join up, you'll help me financially and support the channel, which I appreciate, and in return, I'm going to give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.